It was a long process, but Sweden is finally a member of NATO. What does that mean for the Swedish Armed Forces? That's what we're talking about today. My name is Max Villman. I'm a former fighter pilot in the Swedish Air Force, and let's go. Yeah, it's been a long process, but Sweden has finally joined NATO. Hungary and Turkey finally signed the documents required, and now Sweden is a member. So, what does that mean for the Swedish Armed Forces? First of all, before we can take a look at this map, and the map here, we can see that we now have NATO countries all over the eastern flank. This is the northern area. We're not going to talk so much about that, but a little bit. And now Sweden and Finland has joined, and now we see that basically the entire Baltic Sea, except for Russia's territories, is a NATO sea. And if you take a look at the geographical context, we know that Russia has Kaliningrad, Belarus, and we have Russia. We know also that Russia has ambitions to take over the Baltic states. That has been quite clearly put by Putin. During the München Security Conference in 2007, he said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster in modern time. So that is quite clear. And in the Baltic states, we have a large minority of Russian speakers, an ethnic minority of Russians, which gives Russia an excuse to use military force here. And we know that Russia has no worries about using military force, as we've seen from the conflict in Georgia, in Syria, and now in Ukraine. So that is on the table. And for Russia to attack the Baltic states, they need to do two things. First of all, the defense of the Baltic states is absolutely not enough. NATO has some forces. These are not the latest numbers, but here we see how many Estonians can mobilize. Latvia and Lithuania, their respective numbers here. So there's not much troops, and NATO has put on some extra 1,000 troops. Before it was only a battalion in each country, but now there's a brigade and there's more to come. But still, Russia has access to massive amounts of military infrastructure very, very close to the Baltic states, to the borders, and they don't have to do much to take over the Baltic states. And before that, you might look at the map and you might see that if they can stop the NATO from transitioning through the Suwalki corridor here, either by using artillery or invading around here, they might don't need even to attack Poland. NATO only has two ways to get reinforcements to the Baltic states, and that is over sea or over air. And Russia obviously has very, very long-range GBAD, ground-based air defense systems in Kaliningrad, in the St. Petersburg area, of course, and in Belarus. And if Russia then could start this campaign by taking Gotland, for example, and put GBAD and cruise anti-ship missiles, they could basically create a perimeter and then invade the Baltic states and have a sort of fait accompli when it comes to NATO and the Baltic states. And then NATO would have to actually go on the offensive and take back the Baltic states, which is of course much more consuming of resources and soldiers and lives than defending it from the first place. So in that context, Sweden and Gotland becomes very, very interesting for Russia, and also the Swedish territory as a logistical base. When the US comes to rescue, so to speak, they use Norway, of course, for shipping, and also the western coast of Sweden to get supplies to the Swedish territory. And the Swedish territory, apart from the Finnish territory, has the advantages that you can base things in relative safety compared to in the Baltic states and Finland. So if you have expensive air assets, for example, or other logistics, Swedish territory is very, very interesting from that point of view as a transit corridor, a sort of logistical hub to defend NATO's northeastern border. And we also have the Murmansk area, where Russia has their nuclear submarines, their nuclear submarine fleet, which is of strategic importance for Russia, of course. They have their nuclear forces in form of their strategic bomber force and their ground silos, missile forces, and also ground force they can move around with intercontinental ballistic missile. And then lastly, the triad is composed of nuclear submarines that are based in Murmansk. So Murmansk is a very, very sensitive area, very, very important for Russia to protect. And in that case, they would probably need to push out their ground forces and partly stop NATO from using Norwegian borders to get supplies over to Finland, and also to protect Murmansk. So in that sense, this area, with its characteristics of the subarctic and Arctic environment, it doesn't have much infrastructure, it doesn't have much people, and also not that many military forces either, compared to Central Europe. And therefore this area is very, very interesting also when it comes to Sweden. So Sweden would probably need to help defend Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, and also Finland. So our armed forces will need to protect Gotland, protect our base areas, and then send our army over to either Finland or the Baltic states, or both. Excuse me. And also our general, Mikael Budén, the Supreme Commander, he emphasizes that Sweden now should focus more on missile defense, on ground-based air defense systems, and on having lower number of total troops, but a higher number of readiness on the troops that are there. So he wants to prioritize the money to have 2 mechanized brigades out of the Swedish 3 mechanized brigades. 2 brigades should be very, very high readiness, which of course costs more money, and this is in Swedish, but this is he has put forward on as an article in one of the biggest Swedish newspapers, that Sweden needs to to prioritize high readiness, and also to prioritize keeping the current decision of the defense financed, because the last decision has not been financed fully, and he sees that unless we get more money, we can actually not grow that much when it comes to our NATO forces. So if you go back to the map, we see that Swedish territory becomes very interesting to keep Russia out of Swedish territory, so that NATO can use Swedish territory as a logistical hub, as a defense, as airfields, and also use Gothenburg harbor, and also of course make sure that Russia does not control Gotland. So in that sense, missile defense becomes much more interesting, as you can see from our strategic geographical location. And of course having high readiness on the army, so that the army can quickly go and support Finland or support the Baltic states, is of very, very high importance. And we also have permanent troops based on Gotland as well. Army troops, that is, with ground-based air defenses, and also to protect so that Russia cannot use it. So it's more of Swedish territory is more of an enabler and something that you want Russia to not control than anything else. So in that sense, our whole military strategic geography has changed, because now it's not just a focus to protect Swedish territory, it's much more of a focus to use Swedish territory as an enabler for future NATO operations, because NATO's main part is Article 5, the self-defense article, but it's also made up of Article 3, which is that every country in NATO needs to have their own armed forces and their own strategic deterrence, so to speak. But if NATO would be attacked by Russia, it would take probably several months before every part of NATO is fully mobilized. And during that part, Swedish territory is extremely important to enable reinforcements to being brought forward to the northeastern flank of NATO. And in that sense, our whole strategic part has changed and switched a lot from just defending Sweden, but becoming more of a logistical hub with host nation support and other things. But I will end it there. Please give me some comments below. Write what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What other challenges did you see that I have forgotten to get into? And please give me a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. That helps us grow and doesn't cost you anything, of course. And if you want to, you can also you can jump onto my other social media on X or Instagram and follow me there. But until next time, this is Max, and as always, fly safe.